Hello and welcome to the Film Ireland podcast, where we delve into the stories, talent and creativity behind the Irish screen industries. And in today's episode, we are delighted to be joined by director Lorcan Finnegan and writer Thomas Martin as their darkly funny, tense and visually brilliant feature film, The Surfer, hits cinemas this weekend. So first, have a listen to the trailer here.
You can't stop a wave. Born in a storm, way out to sea. Pure energy. And it's all building to this breaking point.
Hey! Uncle's army!
I grew up here.
Don't live here. Don't surf here.
Hey, Dad.
It's okay. You're scaring my boy.
Now. No need for all this fuss. Listen to me, brother. I know it's smart to lose face in front of your boy, but you gotta know when to back down, or it could get a whole lot worse.
This is a special place for us. There was magic here when I was your age. My old house is finally for sale, and I'm buying it.
Just want to go home now.
Wake up.
Locals only. Don't live here, don't surf here.
I'm not surfing. There's a view for locals only as well. Hey!
Men are like engines. You've got to release a little steam now and then or you'll blow up.
That's my board, and I want it back.
This mate, I think you've been out in the sun too long.
No, my father gave me that board.
I can tell you myself, that old board's been up there for as long as I can remember.
She's a beaut, isn't she?
I'm not trying to be cruel.
We don't belong here anymore.
All I want is to take my son surfing.
Don't kid yourself now. Before you can have everything, you have to experience nothing.
What?
Pathetic.
That's a good one.
Thanks so much for chatting with us.
Thanks for having us.
Thanks for having us, yeah.
So this was such a bold and brilliant, strong, unique film. It's like a joy to watch, and every element of it is so stressful and has such interesting things to say about distortion.
Yeah, good. Glad you got that from the film. Yeah.
So I know you guys met in 2012, like a long time ago. I was wondering if you could kind of talk to me about your collaboration and your working relationship. I think that's just so interesting how like something like this is formed.
Well, it takes a long time, doesn't it? It's like, I find that with every project, like the kind of collaborative thing is sort of, you almost have to date for a long time before we have children.
Yeah. Well, it was very romantic. It was romantic, though. We met in New York at Tribeca, but both Irish. So, we actually lived around the corner from each other in Dublin at the time. So, yeah, we were looking for something to do for a while.
And in terms of that, like, so both of you had very sort of different career trajectories. Like Thomas, you would have worked a lot in TV and kind of been honing your craft that way. And God, Lorcan, you've been kind of just steadily getting more and more exciting and interesting projects that are bigger across the way. And I'm just wondering, in terms of like that connection and keeping that sort of collaboration, is it a thing of you guys run into each other consistently, you're emailing back and forth? I like, it's lovely to see, how that romantic relationship develops into
Well, like I'm a big fan of Lorcan's work, obviously, and I love film, but my career was my day job is television, and films are hard to make, but I really love them. And I was down in Australia, like, so Lorcan and I were talking a lot after we met when we were on a sort of short film circuit, but I was down in Australia a few years ago working on another project, which is sort of a big budget thing set on it's about abalone poaching and the Australian fisheries industry, so big budgets, water, boats and stuff like that. And I surf a bit and I was traveling around it, and that's where I sort of first encountered extreme localism, where these sort of men who protect the breaks, and it's everywhere, and I'd been reading some interesting stuff about it in California, and then I witnessed it sort of firsthand in Australia. And then the story started to come to me a lot about from necessity as well, because I was getting frustrated working on sort of massive television projects that I felt were sort of bland. And even the movies are a bit like that. And I wanted to do something that sort of nobody could stop me doing. So I didn't set out to write an exploitation film, but I wanted to do something that could be extremely low budget and single location, and see if I could do a sort of an uncompromising punk project. And Australia had a lot of these sort of little surf beaches, and I was hanging out at these and seeing these guys surfing, and it's just started to come together like that from a structural point of view. And I'd seen a French movie called Stranger at the Lake, which is set at this lake in France, and the camera sort of arrives with the protagonist at the lake and it doesn't leave. And it was a really it was a really sort of groundbreaking thing for me, because it's hard to make single location films that don't seem sort of claustrophobic and oppressive in a sort of bad way. But when you do it all exterior, you've got the blue sky and the lake, and that's sort of suddenly where I realized, yeah, maybe we could make this sort of weird little movie. And the story started to come to me from there, and I knew Lorcan was right for it because we sort of both have a love of Australian new wave movies. And I sort of called him up and I was like, look, I've got this story. Um, would you be interested in making an exploitation film? And I think only Lorcan would be, yes, of course. That's not weird
Yeah.
at all.
That
So
was
we
like
went,
2019. I was checked a while ago to see like when that you sent me that outline, which is mad. That like 2012, 2019, and then 2023 we make the film.
yeah,
That's how long these things take. But it's not like
yeah.
we're working on them all the time. It's just we were trying to find the time to be free, available, and I think a lot of the time with films, the universe has to kind of conspire towards getting it made. That everyone's available, that Nick Cage wants to do it, that we find good producers in Australia to work with, that, the weather being good. Like we're very lucky it didn't even rain at all when we were there. And we weren't shooting during the summer, we were shooting in the spring when it would normally be kind of rainy. So yeah, a lot of luck involved.
That is very exciting. And I kind of I'm going to go back in and dig in a little bit to what you've just said, because Thomas, I would say you're working on TV. You say it's bland. I suppose it's not as like out there or complex or like in some ways challenging as this certainly is. But I loved Ron. I thought it was one of the
Oh, really?
one of my
Yeah,
favorite
yeah. Well,
shows.
listen, that started my career off. Yes, and actually, for any TV producers listening, I'm not that down on it.
Vanilla maybe? Like, I mean,
Yeah,
vanilla is a great flavor. Everyone loves
yeah,
it, but yeah,
yeah, yeah.
me not
It's
this.
just that I don't know the way my career has gone, and it's great because I've just done a show for Apple, and you can do incredibly exciting stuff, but there's a lot of compromises you have to make, and in film you do as well, But what was interesting, and Lorcan and I sort of connected on this about trying to do something that maybe we had more creative control over,
Mm,
and that comes with limitations, but limitations can be really good creatively. Um, and that's what I wanted to do, and I think that's what really excited me about it.
mm.
Watching this film as an outsider, I think limitations definitely wouldn't be the first word that came to my mind when I watched it, because it's so bold and there's such strong experimental elements. I was just wondering how many of those might have been in the script or might have been things that you discussed. Maybe the more visual elements, or maybe the ones that isn't obvious on the page as a viewer, if that makes sense.
I mean, there's loads of that stuff, but it's kind of like you've got the text and then how that text is interpreted. Do you know what I mean? Like, obviously, good writing leaves room for that. I find that, like, if something on the page is inspiring, then like, for example, there's a scene in the film where this is slightly spoilerish, but all of the characters sort of reveal themselves to Nick. And I remember people were worried about that, that on the page it seemed like suddenly there was this big reveal. But when we were talking about it, I was like, yeah, we should do it like, it's more like weird and like the Wizard of Oz, where Dorothy is surrounded by the people who are in her, in the Wizard of Oz, but now they're human, and it's like, and you were there, and you were there, and so then like to interpret that on the page, it was like, okay, well, we're going to shoot it in this kind of weird interior hut, which was the first time we've gone inside this tiki hut, and it's all red. I wanted it to look like some sort of like opium den or something, and they inject him, and then we shot with this kind of a lens with a lot of distortion on it. And then after he gets injected with this drug and they all start talking to him, we shot through water. Like I had a water tank above Nick and, we're down on his face like that. And then same with the reverse angle on all these guys and with the big wide angle lens constantly turning, you know. So like that kind of thing is like a a visual interpretation of the text on the page. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Yeah, and like from early on, we talked a lot. Like, there's a lot of influence. I like to write sort of discombobulating, strange stories, but that are sort of rooted in reality. And then because I know like Lorcan brings that wonderful sort of surreal aesthetic, and I knew he'd layer that over it. And we talked a lot about like some of my influences for the script were well, firstly, like Australian stuff. Like there's an Australian short story writer called Robert Drew who wrote a collection called The Body Surfers, which I stumbled upon in this bookshop in Sydney at the time. And there's a story in that called Shark Logic, which is about a kind of a guy who becomes unhoused and unmoored from his life. And it just really struck me. So there was that. There was J.G. Ballard's Concrete Island, which is another kind of singular person who gets sort of trapped in a
Mm,
metaphorical sort of landscape. So we talked about that, but we also talked about John Cheever's The Swimmer, which is again about a man at a certain point in his life who becomes unmoored from, his family and reality, and things get gradually more surreal. And Lorcan and I really chatted about that a lot because it was made into a movie with Burt Lancaster in the
mm,
60s, and we sort of it had this really weird dreamy surreal quality to it, but on the page it slowly gets there in a linear. I knew that I could just write that sort of a text. That's what I aspired to, and then Lorcan
mm,
would bring those sort of elements, the visual sort of discombobulation. And Tony as well, the editor, did a great job as well of
And
finding some of
music and
those
sound
elements.
design and
Yeah.
costume and wardrobe and makeup, everything. All of the heads of department were working really well, I think.
There's such strong, like, yeah, Tony Cranston, the thing, it's something as well. If you just saw this in isolation without any credits, it would not feel like anything, a traditional Irish film by any sense of what that word could even possibly entail.
Well,
Yeah.
maybe, yeah, this is a funny point,
Yeah.
because like I think from writing, there's different types of Irish writing, like some of the Irish, they're not really filmmakers, but some of the novelists and people that I like that are Irish, and or people like Gerald Donovan, he writes stuff that's sort of set outside Ireland or even in weird sort of spaces, but it's a space to explore things that are close to home, like violence, even the poetry. Like, and this is going a bit highfalutin, but like, Derek Mann's poetry or whatever. It's not like Irish on the page, but it's about sort of themes that are sort of resonant here, violence and the history of violence. And
And the outsider
Australia,
and the protective nature
yeah,
of
yeah,
land and closing ranks and suspicion. Like
yeah.
all of that is there. Like you could set it in a remote village and have it in like the early
Mm, mm,
1900s or something. Like you could get that like energy from it.
Yeah, yeah. So it's a funny one because it's obviously set in Australia, but the thing that drew me down there in the first place was that it's sort of like Ireland on steroids in a lot of ways. It's a good space to explore extremes that I've experienced here, and I know Lorcan has. And Lorcan anyway is where you can speak to your work, Lorcan, but it
mm.
takes it to these extra spaces. But I don't think that makes it any less Irish
That's the
than
thing. It's like, an Irish film. What is an Irish film? If an Irish director and an Irish writer make a movie, it's an Irish film, kind of. And also, we've all grown up, like, I think everyone in Ireland kind of grew up on a diet of Home and Away and Neighbours and Skippy. So,
yeah.
It was
Yeah,
already
yeah,
in our
yeah.
DNA, in our
And
imagination.
and exploitation films
Yeah,
for
yeah.
some of them.
Later. But you
Yeah,
know what I
yeah,
mean?
yeah.
As in there's familiarity. I think there's a kind of, and everyone knows people who emigrated to Australia, and like I'd been there on to weddings and I worked there shooting commercials and stuff like that as well. It's kind of yeah,
Yeah. It's a
culturally.
fantastic place to work as well as a filmmaker. The crews are great. The
Mm,
actors are great. There's a wealth of talent down there. And they're
mm.
actually, it's a funny, there's not going down to make a film as two sort of outsiders. One, the film is about an outsider there anyway, so it's fine. But there's a precedent for foreign filmmakers to go to Australia in that sort of zone of the Australian new wave exploitation. Some of those big movies, like a big influence for Lorcan and I earlier was Wake and Fright, and that's what's the director's name? Ted Kutcher.
Oh, Wake and Fright,
Wake and
Ted
Fright.
Ketchup.
Ted
Ted
Kutcher, he's
Ketchup, and then
Canadian, and the screenwriter is from Jamaica, Evan Jones, and Walkabout, which Nick Rogue directed, and Edward Bond wrote it. Both, Brits, and yeah, like a ton of those big movies. Like The Last Wave is another one, the Peter Weir movie. The screenwriter in that, Petru Popescu, is Iranian or Romanian American, and yeah, and the last one is a big. What's his name? Everett DeRoche. He wrote a ton of those exploitation films, like Long Weekend, Patrick, and he was American. So there's a precedent for those sorts of
mm.
movies being sort of written by and directed by outsiders. So
It was so interesting as well watching it again as someone that like Lorcan, your work, it feels very much in your voice. Like it feels like a film that is a very natural progression from your other films, which is so interesting in terms of finding that. Did you know when you got those pages, yes, or was it something that you were developing alongside your other projects of where it would sit in that escalation? Because it's again so stylish, but the commentary is so strong and it's sort of funny, but in an angry way, which is
That's not funny, yeah. I mean, what was really interesting and challenging to me with this was that I remember me and Tom talked about it as well because it's quite hard to do on paper as well. It's like to make this like subjective film, so it's all from this character's subjective experience. Everything that he goes through is told through his eyes. So we never cut away to like some information elsewhere, or we never have like some sort of objective shot that sort of shows what's actually happening. So like that's really interesting and challenging, and kind of exciting to make, especially with an actor like Cage, where you can really get into it and play with perception and heat. And so basically the audience goes on the same journey as him, which is I mean, some people find that too intense, but a lot of people love it. I've heard people that saying they felt like dehydrated and really thirsty in the cinema, which is great. Um, but then we had to kind of bring him to that point though. Like I remember we were like talking about incrementally ratcheting up all of the things that happened to him. And even in the edit, like once we got to start cutting the film, the faster we piled the stuff on top of him, the more enjoyable it was and the funnier it was, but also the more cathartic it was when he finally snaps and grabs that sign, the locals only sign, and runs down to the beach to bash Pitbull, which always gets a big cheer in the cinema, which is cool.
mm.
and in terms of like finding that pacing and finding the beat, so you things that you wanted to capture stylistically that were very strong and that worked, but the pacing and the reveals and that timing is very important. And I do think like the sound mix and then that score, that's such a distinct
Mm.
or was that again something that was like pre-decided a long time ago, or was something that was sort of eked out in that process?
Well, I think the first kind of pacing came from the script, and then I remember like Tom did a draft right before we were shooting where we had to like tighten things up a bit because of schedule reasons and all sorts of stuff, but also so there wasn't any repetition, or like combining things where he'd like lose his wallet and his shoes and his jacket all in one go rather than one by one. And then I knew I wanted it to be pacey as a film. I mean, what I think is pacey and what like You know, young people these days think of spacey are probably two different things. But so we did shoot on. We've got a DP, kind of a graduate DP, from Perth to shoot on a second camera. So we had Radek Ladzik, the Polish cinematographer, shooting on the camera A, and this guy shooting camera B, but not sort of cross shooting in a sort of traditional sense, but more like picking up details on a long lens, so that we'd have more to cut between, and I also knew that because it was a subjective, weird experience, that we wanted it to feel kind of dreamy, like a fever dream, so there's a lot of long lens, kind of slow zooms in on Nick's face, and I asked him to grow out his eyebrows and nasal hair and ear hair and everything so that his face become kind of like almost like the bush, this sort of masculine landscape. But and then so that like that was the plan for it to have that. And I even remember saying it to Nick, about the pace, and he was like, "Okay, that's good to know, edit wise," so that he delivered his dialogue reasonably snappily. He's got amazing diction, so he can deliver like large pieces of dialogue very succinct and clearly, and in a short space of time, which is what you're always looking for in the edit. And then yeah, with the music, Francois started doing sketches really based off the script before we even had a location. And then when I was scouting in Australia, I sent him photos of the location that we kind of decided on in Yallingup, which is about 4 hours south of Perth. And he'd actually been there. He'd had like a Christmas there years before, which is kind of unusual because nobody's been to Yallingup. Um, and he had like a weird kind of personal connection with the place and had a feeling from it. So he started writing some music, and he was also writing it based on the rhythms of waves, like the sets of waves and how they crash and the kind of sparkle of foam on the water is sort of like the chimes. And then we came down to the set. We were shooting a night scene where Nick is kind of going back to the Bay Boys looking for his board back, and he ends up having what we called an Australian sand fight around like 3 in the morning. And in the background there was houses lit up on the cliff, and Francois did a sketch of them, and that ended up forming part of the melody for like do 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 do. So that all of it was all sort of informing each other. It was sort of a weird ecosystem of ideas, because Tony had started editing as well at the same time. So the scenes were being assembled, we were still shooting, Francois was scoring the music. And then Asa came on a little bit later to start doing sound design, and we had a lot of fun with that as well, with all the cicadas, and we got the actual actors to make weird bird calls and animal calls that we mixed in to try and like create this landscape of sort of wildness, but also these kind of men in the manscape.
Another form of animals in this
Yeah,
as well,
exactly.
which is very interesting. And I want to talk about like directing Nick Cage. You're no stranger to like high profile actors in your work. Because he was sort of, it sounds like he was kind of tortured in a fun way where he's bitten by a snake and drinking from puddles, and but there was improv involved. I was wondering if you could just tell me about, yeah, what that process was like and getting him. That was very exciting.
Yeah, well, I mean, we're very lucky. We sent the script to him, kind of thinking, yeah, maybe you never know. And he was telling me last week the first thing that he loved was the title, Surfer. He was like, "Yeah, man, Surfer. It's intriguing. I grew up in California. That's good." And then he'd seen Vivarium, which is pretty amazing. And then he went and watched Nocebo. Then he read the script, and he loved it. He thought it like he said in a Q&A last week that it's the kind of, if he wrote short stories, that's the kind of short story he'd love to
Mm.
write. He kind of picked up on the Kafkaesque weirdness of it as well. And um, so then he came on board. We had a call. We got on very well. We're into the same kind of films and had a similar sense of humor. And then directing him, like he's incredibly prepared. So it made my job. easier, to be honest. He wasn't difficult at all. He's very used to independent filmmaking. So like he didn't go off to his trailer and everyone's, radioing and all that, waiting for him to come back to set. He'd just take a deck chair and sit there, and the flies would swarm all over his face we had like glycerin sweat, which the flies loved. Um, but he'd read the script forwards, backwards, forwards, backwards until he knows it, and then he never needs to see it.
Yeah,
Uh,
I mean, he's incredibly well prepared. And as a writer, when you talk to an actor, you always know, but like he knew the script like I know the script, he could just jump around. And he read like everything we told him to watch, everything we told him to read, he really went for it. He's devoted to his craft. And he's very exciting, very passionate about acting, and movies, and he's still got that fire.
yeah, exactly.
Was it exciting watching him embody your character as well, that you had kind of built
Yeah, it
on?
was great. And like early on, it was weird because the swimmer, because Lorcan and I talked about the swimmer and about the movie of it and Burt Lancaster and bringing that sort of dreaminess to it. But as we got deeper into it, like Nicolas Cage and Burt Lancaster are sort of at very similar points in their career, as in when Burt Lancaster made the swimmer
Mm.
and where Nick is now. And then when we first did a call with Nick, he really responded to that. And yeah, I think that's one of his favorite things about the influences over the surfer, and he really brought that, and you sort of see it in the performance. Um,
Yeah, I remember day one, uh he got into the suit, the shoes, and I wanted the suit to be the same color as the sand to kind of like match him back to the beach. And we did like the first take, whatever. He's like, "Yes, I'm now the surfer." And yeah, I mean, like there was like apart from, there's only a few scenes really that were improv-y. One where I think in the script it said like he's walking around the car park talking, asking people, "Have you seen my broker?" And then rambling incoherently or something like that. And
yeah, ad lib rambling.
exactly, yeah. So he
Yeah.
brought his A game to the ad lib rambling and started, saying, "Oh, I want to make dinner for my wife. I'm going to make her puttanesca pasta and clams casino on the balcony and um, fisherman, have you caught a fish?" All that kind of stuff, which is great. And then that went on. That like went on way longer. I was like hiding in one of the cars because we were shooting on a really wide angle lens and you could see everybody, all the video village and trucks and everything had to kind of get out of there. So I was hiding in one of the cars in the car park with a little monitor, like tears rolling down my face, laughing because he started singing "Jump Around" by House of Pain, and like he put the rat in his mouth and he's swinging around. He sort of went off on a fugue state, I think, which I'm gonna have to make that video resurface somehow.
I'd say that is a career like high as well, to see
Yeah, totally.
like this is our project. This
This
is
is
now
gas, yeah.
this
But I
work.
mean, we
Like
had a good
paying
laugh,
for this.
and I think like that because we had a good laugh making it between things and all of that. It created an atmosphere where he's up for having the crack in a way, like eating the raw bird's eggs and all that. Like an actor could turn around and get difficult and just be like, "Yeah, listen, I'm not doing that," and then you have to try and figure out an alternative. Um, but he was up for all of that, and I think he enjoyed it, and that's why the eat the rat thing came about because we were having a laugh, and he wanted to. I think he kind of felt like he needed to keep this rat prop. He wanted to put it in his pocket, and he thought his character would keep it, which is fair enough. A little prize of protein, and then he'd made this parallel between the movie Sabrina, the Audrey Hepburn film with Humphrey Bogart. And there's a scene in the film where Humphrey Bogart takes an olive and shoves it in another guy's mouth and says, "Eat it." And so he wanted to do that with the rat later on. So that's the kind of imagination. But like, he asked me what did I think, and I was like, "Yeah, let's do it." If it doesn't work, we can cut it. But like, let's try it. So I don't think that would have happened though if he wasn't having a good time. Do you know what I mean? Where the creative juices are flowing and all
the
that.
play, like that kind of creative play.
Exactly.
Just
Yeah, exactly.
you'd such a long standing ovation in Cannes. Was that a relief? Like when you're working on something and you're like, okay, I'm gonna get it out there, or like what was that feeling like
Yeah,
sitting in there?
pretty surreal.
I mean, yeah, probably one of the most surreal and greatest moments of my life, you know. I mean, it was nerve-wracking too. Like it was crazy. Like, we had a police escort down to the Lumiere Theater. You know, it's the most famous cinema in the world, the biggest as well, I think. There's thousands of people there all dressed in like black tie and stuff. And I thought the film was maybe funnier than it was and less intense. And nobody was really making a sound for the first hour, and I was kind of worried. And then when, you know, when Nick runs down to the beach, the whole place like just erupted in cheering, and then I sort of felt a little better about it, you know, like a weight off. But it was an incredible night, you know.
Yeah, very surreal. And kind of relief. Yeah. Yeah, definitely a relief. I mean, the thing is, we'd been like making the film. I mean, we only shot in October, November, then got back and started doing post, and then like had to submit a kind of rough cut to Cannes, and then we found out kind of late-ish. I think all the announcements were kind of late that year. Um, and so then we found out we were in, and we're like, oh shit, okay, we have to like finish the film. We can't. So it wasn't like we were languishing around waiting for the film to play. It was like get it the DCP, get it in there, you know. And then we arrived, we did a tech check. I did a tech check at like, I think it was 3:30 or 4 in the morning or something. It's the only time you can do it there. And then in the cinema, and then it played, and then, you know, which was great, like to be able to rush it all, have a play, and then you're done in Cannes with a standing ovation. It's kind of like, okay, good. Okay, good. It works.
Thank you so much for chatting with us. It's such an exciting film. I hope audiences will also give a 6 minute ovation as they see it in cinemas. But thanks so much for chatting with us.
Yeah, no worries. Good to chat to you.
Thanks for having us. Cheers.
And thank you so much for listening. So if you enjoyed these episodes, don't forget to like and rate and subscribe to Film Ireland wherever you get your podcasts, and check out filmireland.ie for articles, events and news and reviews.